especially our visitors, Martin and James, along with Chris and the leader of council. Right, okay, we'll start off with any apologies for absence, Michelle?
Hello, yes, we've just had 2 apologies, Mike White and Bridget Rowlands.
Okay, and we don't have to do a roll call because we're recording?
Yeah.
Right, okay, any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests? I know that we all had the forms to fill in with regards to the last meeting we had about the audit of particular schools. I'm not sure if everybody had the opportunity to fill them in, because I tried numerous times and thankfully just managed to do it again today to fill in. And Lyndon's being attacked by a cat by the looks of it.
I am, yeah, he's joining the meeting, he is, yeah. Gosh, come on, you're going to go down there. Sorry about this.
So if you haven't had the opportunity, if you can fill those forms in, please. Today, I don't think there is any declarations. Anyone? Members? No. Okay. Then we go on to the prohibition of whipped votes and declarations of party whips. I don't suspect there are any of them. The minutes of the previous meeting, has anybody any comments on them? I'll go through them. Page 1. Page 2. I know they're quite complicated because of the way in which the audit panel, the auditor actually gave us information. Okay, then there's page 3. Any questions or comments? No? Right, okay, then we move on to public questions. Now, we have had one. Michelle, can you explain what's happened?
Yes, we had public questions and it relates to social services matters. So I've referred it on to your next meeting and to Dave Howes, and he'll respond at that meeting.
Okay, just to let you know, we will tell the person who's asked the question what we're doing so that they are informed that the question will be answered, but it won't be until next time. Okay, then we have procurement in the place directive, and I'm pretty sure that Martin, are you going to lead with this?
I am, thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, we've got a couple of the portfolio cabinet members here, Councillor Robert Francis Davis and the leader. Obviously, the Place Directorate cuts across quite a number of portfolios, 6 or 7. So we've got representation from the cabinet members here, and Nigel Williams, the head of service for building services, is also in attendance. Obviously, building being one of the larger procurers of services. So I'm hoping if there's any questions of detail, Nigel will be able to help me out in that regard. If it's okay, Chair, I was just going to sort of give some brief headlines. Obviously, members would have had the report. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to study it. I was just going to draw attention to some of the key points rather than go through the report in detail, and actually leave more time for any questions or comments or discussions, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
There we are. So section 2, just wanted to highlight, I guess, the scale of the procurement within the Place Directorate. And for the 2021 financial year, there was actually about £155 million of procurement that took place via the Place Directorate across a range of activities, some of which are listed in the report. And we expect to be in excess of the £150 million in terms of this year as well. So it's quite a sizable programme. And from my experience in the council, that has grown significantly over the years, and has had impacts on most of the service areas within Place. The section 2 has also outlined some of the main activities, and it's not meant to be exhaustive, but just to give the panel some flavour really for the sorts of things that are being procured. And some of the key headings there on building and housing, regenerations, and highways and transportation. But there will be sort of procurement that takes place in every corner of the directorate. But I wanted to give you just some high-level indications. Section 3 then outlines that the funding for Place comes from a variety of sources, and therefore the procurement activities are in line with varying conditions depending on where that funding comes from. So there will be traditional council revenue, there will be traditional council capital, but there would also be significant funding that comes in from various grant sources, Welsh Government, previously European funding and other sources, and via the housing revenue account that's obviously, as members will know, a ring-fenced account specifically related to works on the council's social housing stock. So, and sometimes, depending particularly on grant conditions, the rules and the requirements may be slightly different of the grant awarding body, but the principles in terms of them being delivered in line with the council's contract procedure rules will remain the same. Section 3 and elsewhere in the report, it also touches on the references to frameworks, and you may have covered this in one of your previous sessions, so I won't go into detail, but essentially it allows the council and the council in conjunction with its partners, whether that be regionally or across all of Wales, to join together and identifying common packages of work or common products or services where it amalgamates its spend and effectively sets up a framework allowing all of the partners named within that framework to buy off that one framework, rather than every single time that you undertake a procurement activity having to go out with a bespoke open tender process. And it's always going to be a balance between the two types of procurement depending on the activities that are being let. As part of that, the council will also take the direct lead on that. So Nigel may want to mention later, the council has taken the lead for many years, for example, setting up and awarding an asbestos framework on behalf of all of its partners across Wales, because we previously had the expertise and we've continued to do that. So what it does allow is it does allow you to simplify the procurement process and buy it once for Wales or buy it once for the regions. And many of those fundamental principles are embedded within some of the regional frameworks that are already in existence for both contractors and for consultants, certainly across South West Wales. And many of those principles are now embedded, for example, within the City Deal procurement requirements for any City Deal projects. Section 4 outlines sort of effectively how the governance of that type of arrangement would work in terms of authorised officers. So anybody undertaking a procurement activity, either buying or paying then for those services, goods and services when they're received, would be set out within an authorised officer listing to make sure that they're clear on the thresholds and they're clear about what authorisation they have. And effectively, it works on a hierarchical structure up to the head of service and myself as director. And as you go up the levels, then the ability to certify and purchase things at a higher value go with it. So more junior officers would have a lower threshold than more senior officers, and there would always be the ability to make sure that at least two people then certify those payments, the contract award, and then the payments that are subsequently being made. Section 5 just covers some of the issues around how do we ensure there's transparency and consistency and that compliance with contract procedure rules. And Section 6 touches on some of the community benefit angles. So how do we consider the contracts and tenders being awarded based on the most economically advantageous tender as opposed to lowest price alone. And I'm sure the panel will be fully aware that many years ago, tenders were generally awarded only on price. That isn't something the council has done for as long as I can remember. There are varying degrees in which the price quality matrix works, but typically you would be normally looking at a price aspect of an award of being circa 70% and the quality aspect being circa 30%. So that 70-30 mix is quite normal. Sometimes it might be slightly higher on price. Sometimes it might be slightly higher on quality. And there are examples of where you might get actually down to 40 or 50 or even 60% of the award criteria being based on quality. And when I refer to the sort of quality elements, they could include things like apprentices beyond bricks and mortar, trainee placements, environmental benefits, but also the quality of the team who are undertaking that, putting that tender submission together. So a range of aspects, and one of the things that we're in dialogue with procurement colleagues corporately is around how do we move that line upwards in terms of particularly around the social value aspects, obviously. So that's an area where, and you'll see that in the recommendations later on anyway, but an area that we would like to explore further. 6.6 is just an example, and there are other examples, but that's an example of where there was a definitive choice made, and this was on one of our housing projects where we were procuring the opportunity of the More Homes project, and what we had previously identified was a challenge in terms of the industry and the inability, based on the specification and what was being procured, for many local suppliers to be able to participate and actually engage and procure and secure contracts. By changing the specifications and looking at a different way of procuring, we were able to, or the service was able to, significantly increase the amount of procurement activity that could be awarded locally, and the percentages are set out, and then I'm sure Nigel will be happy to expand on those if members wish to do so. Section 7 and Section 8 outline how we align with the equality obligations, and Section 8 then also align, as I've mentioned, in terms of staff training and perhaps what we could do further in that regard. Section 9 outlines the joint procurement, and I've mentioned probably most of that already around regional frameworks and working with things like the National Procurement Service in terms of buying those goods and services off frameworks rather than running a bespoke standalone procurement exercise ourselves. Section 10 outlines some of the monitor arrangements that are in place, and Section 11 refers to a link back to the earlier point I made around funding. So, you know, so as well as internal audit that take place as part of the normal internal audit cycle, there are external reviews depending on where the funding source comes from. So that could be Welsh Government in terms of grant awards for things like new schools, but it could be other audit or requirements that we are required to satisfy via grant bodies, either central government or previously EU funding. Section 12 is around looking at how do we or can we identify effectively what the impact of the departure from EU has meant in terms of our procurement, and it's quite difficult to disentangle. What we can say is we are currently experiencing challenges in terms of sourcing materials and goods and services, and we are certainly paying more in many cases, certainly from building materials perspective, paying more than we were previously. That's now recorded as a corporate risk. It's that degree of severity that it's now recorded as a corporate risk. There is a risk that it'll impact on the delivery of some of our projects, but the various project teams are doing everything they can to mitigate against that risk. As I said, it would be impossible to say it's as a result of Brexit or a result of COVID. It is likely to be a combination of the two. But as I said, as part of that corporate risk, we are doing what we can to mitigate it. And I know in terms of advanced buying and getting materials on our own sites in advance of when we perhaps need them, so that we've got that effective stockpile to protect ourselves against those shortages. Section 13 just outlines some of the opportunities for where we think there may be improvements. And a lot of that is around, you know, early engagement, continuous engagement with colleagues within corporate commercial services, and those relationships work very, very well. But also, what can we do further, I think, around that social value and working on the pilot projects that are currently underway, and particularly engaging with small and medium enterprises, with SMEs, around the barriers to procurement, which we have done quite a lot of work on over the years. And we've also been in a position to participate in a pilot programme with Welsh Government about how do we remove those barriers, and the projects that were chosen were within building services. So I'm sure Nigel can provide some further detail on that if members require. But it's really about getting the balance right of having a robust and controlled procurement process to make sure everything's ethical and transparent, but not having unnecessary barriers for SMEs or any contractors, so they are put off providing services to the council. And it's getting that balance right, and that's something that has to be continually reviewed because the market does continually change. Thank you, Chair. That's all I was going to do by way of a brief, hopefully a briefish overview. Happy to take any questions. I'm not sure if any of the Cabinet members have anything to add to that, but if not, I'll be happy to take any questions amongst us.
I think we go to the cabinet members first, and then if any of the officers would like to say anything before I've got one person with his hand up already, but I'll go to the cabinet members first. And the leader, do you want to say anything on this?
Chris, Chair, just very quickly. I mean, Martin's covered all the main points. I think just to underline the fact that obviously the localism aspect is something that we continue to focus on to ensure that the money that we spend, especially on the significantly large capital programs, stays as local as possible. So that's a key aim of our procurement strategy. And just really to pay tribute, because I know on the call today with us will be people like Nigel, and just for members to be aware, certainly during the pandemic, Nigel and his team played a critical role in ensuring key supplies of things like PPE were retained, and that we obviously procured those on behalf of MPT Council as well, and the businesses in those areas. So just to say, look, I mean, it's not just been a normal sort of 12 or 18 months, as people would understand. The guys have gone over and above to ensure supply chains remain fully stocked and staffed. And I really just wanted to add my thanks and appreciation for the work that's been done to deliver on our obligations, because yeah, you know, obviously people will see the difference the large projects made, but it's actually the smaller stuff as well that goes on day to day that is really, really important in keeping the council ticking over.
Okay, thank you, Leader. Councillor Robert Francis Davis, Cabinet Member.
Not really a lot to add, Councillor Hawley. It's I'd like to reiterate, you know, our thanks to Nigel Williams and to Chris Williams as well, in that the way everybody's pulled together during this pandemic. Procurement sounds easy to put out there and wait for people to respond and give all the reasons why they should have the contract, bearing in mind all our policies of, you know, the weighting on not just the price and best value, but does it create local jobs and the supply chain. But it has been very difficult as well. I know on some of these building contracts, building materials have gone up greatly in price, and making sure that they continue to keep getting the materials in. Some people might say it's the problems created by Brexit. Other people say it's the pandemic, and I suppose the truth is out there somewhere, but whether we'll ever find that, I'm not sure. But I think every department, and from the lowest chain of having responsibility for the small purchases right up to the major purchases, everybody works within the framework of our policies. I think our staff have been excellent when you look at the arena, for instance, huge project, and to build that during a pandemic and continue supplies. It's important that the contractors that we pick are the right contractors to make sure that they get the supply chain going and moving and getting the workforce as well during very difficult times. So again, my thanks to both Nigel and to Chris Williams, and also Martin Nichols and the team for the way they performed over the last 2 years. It's above and beyond.
Okay, I'll ask Nigel for his comments now, and then I'll come on to the members. Okay, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Being as PP's been mentioned, I think it's worth commenting. We've issued more than 30 million items now across the board. We haven't had a single complaint from any of the care settings or any of the service areas in relation to the supply of PPE. It's contrary, we've had compliments from almost every care setting, private homes, our own care home, social services. From day one, we made it clear that we wanted to make sure every care setting would have the requirements of the PPE that they needed, and we delivered that. And I'm very proud of the team, Chris's team and my own. We've still got 4 officers who are working on PPE, permanent, doing deliveries or orders. And Welsh Government are committed to providing PPE until March of next year. So it's been an ongoing process, bit of a challenge at times, and it came at the same time as we were tasked with building the Bayfield Hospital. £25 million delivered within the first phase, completed within 7 weeks, and the overall 12 weeks to deliver the hospital that they thankfully didn't need. So some fantastic work being carried out. Commenting on what Martin was saying about the drive to go to more local suppliers. As you all know, the first houses that we built were to a passive house standard, which resulted in us having to get materials which were passive accredited. That resulted in materials coming from Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Ireland, all over the Europe, because we just could not get them locally. By changing to our Swansea standard, it resulted in well over 90% of the materials and trade resource being within a 25-30 mile radius of Swansea. Example, on the timber frames, we were getting them from Ireland. We now get them from Trahan, which is just outside of Swansea. And local suppliers doing the solar PV, the ground and air source heat pumps. We've got our own employees currently being trained so we can deliver that ourselves. You may have noticed the recruitment drive that we've currently got. We're looking to take on an extra 34 trade employees. That will allow us to do the retrofit in Swansea, where we'll be fitting air source, ground source heat pumps to existing properties, and solar and PV as part of the enveloping contracts. And another thing that we've done to try and encourage local suppliers or contractors is concentrate on labour-only contracts. So the small companies, the one-man bands who historically maybe wouldn't have wanted to work with Swansea because it was too onerous and a big risk for them in relation to material purchase, is we've got labour only, where they just come and work for us on a labour only basis on contracts, and we provide the materials. So that's encouraged a lot more engagement with those local suppliers and local companies who historically wouldn't have worked with us. So we're doing everything we can, and we're not just looking at the big boys to come and work in Swansea, but looking at the local companies to make sure that we keep the money in Swansea and improve everything as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Thank you for your comments, and I'm sure the members are going to have quite a lot to say. I've got 3 members currently. Councillor Peter Jones.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank Martin and his colleagues for what I think is a very informative and comprehensive report. I'm a virgin as far as procurement is concerned, and I've learned a great deal, I think, from reading this report and from the comments that we've heard so far this morning. I would like to concentrate, if I may, Chair, on, in particular, paragraph 314, which is on page 7 of the report. Interested in this, of course, wearing my diversity hat, if you like, because it draws attention to recognising the importance both of the Wellbeing Act and the Environment Act in terms of thinking about the placement, presumably, of procurement decisions. And I'm very pleased to read that those 2 pieces of legislation do form part of the decision-making process. It's very important indeed that they should. And I also read, of course, that there is reference in there to what is called a sustainability statement in terms of bespoke to each particular larger project. And I'd welcome in a moment some information perhaps on what form this sustainability statement takes and who is involved in putting it together. And I know, moving down that paragraph, of course, a reference to the involvement of various council colleagues, including ecologists, which I trust includes a reference to our own planning ecologists in the nature conservation team, with whom I had a very interesting discussion in fact last week about her work, and I was very impressed by what she's already done and what she will be doing. So I'd welcome any statement about that. And then in relation to, if I may, paragraph 13.6, at the bottom of, towards the bottom of 14 of the report, there's a reference to giving appropriate weight to biodiversity, natural environment, and so on in terms of decision making, and then a reference to, quote, the current council pilot programme reviewing these issues. So again, I'd like some information, please, Chair, if I may, concerning that process. So all things environmental, please, officers. Thank you.
Okay, what we'll do is at the end, we'll get Michelle to put this in to a letter, and then we'll ask all the various officers for feedback on the environmental issues, Peter. Next is Councillor Wendy Fitzgerald.
Oh, sorry, Chair, I couldn't unmute for some reason. Well, mine's a very simple, broad question, apart from the fact I was going to say, Nigel, I thought some of the comments you made were very interesting. I think it's very positive that we've moved to labour-only contracts. You know, I think that is a real plus for us. I was very interested to hear too that we aren't now importing from Belgium and further remoter parts of Europe in order to build our houses, and we've got the Swansea standard. Excellent move, really, really positive. But the one curious question I wanted to ask was, you know, we've heard about Brexit, we've heard about COVID. Now we all will have heard too that there was a massive blockage in the Suez Canal earlier this year, and this has had widespread effects, long-term effects, so I gather. So is there any indication at all that this has also impacted on the scarcity of building materials, which obviously is a concern and is a problem? Thanks.
Nigel, that's a relatively easier question for you to answer than the procurement.
I always do easy
than the environmental one. So would you like to answer that?
Yeah, certainly. We've certainly seen a big impact on prices in particular. We haven't got to a point yet where we haven't been able to get materials, but we are having to pay a premium for them, which is obviously a concern because we're trying to protect the public pound as best we can. We were aware of the issues that were about to arise, so I think we were ahead of the game in getting additional supplies brought in. Most of our sites we stocked up with certainly render products, insulation products, to make sure that we could keep going with our enveloping contracts. We were made aware very early on about the risk with cement-based products being a shortage. Timber has become probably our most problematic material to get a hold of. And thankfully, we've got our own timber store in Helogos, which we stocked up to the hilt to make sure that we had plenty of supplies to see us through, whilst we were also making future orders with our existing suppliers who could confirm that they would definitely deliver what we were asking. So far, we've been very fortunate that we were ahead of the game and we've got plentiful stocks. So it hasn't impacted on us as yet. And what we're hoping is that there's a blip. You know, the Suez Canal certainly had an impact on it. Brexit has as well. And I think the one that we all keep missing, and I do keep raising, is the impact that people not being able to go abroad and now spending money on home improvements. So we are seeing, and we've seen this with some of the contractors that we currently use, where they aren't tendering for work with us because their order books are so full with garden improvements, new kitchens and bathrooms, loft extensions, etc. Because the spare money people have got where they're not spending on holidays, they're now improving their own homes. And even I spoke to one of the senior managers, Excellent Jones, 3 weeks ago, and they've seen a significant increase in their private purchases of materials. And the local supply, the local contractors, the small 1- and 2-man band outfits, they're certainly run off their feet with requests at the moment. And that's great for Swansea and the infrastructure of, you know, people improving their homes, etc. But it has had a bit detrimental effect on us with getting some materials. But thankfully, everything is being provided so far.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Next one is Councillor Lyndon Jones.
Great, thanks, Chair. Could I too thank the officers? Really well done for what you've been doing and keeping all the balls in the air to make sure that we had the supplies that we need and so on, and getting out there to get them. I think for all the reasons that people have already mentioned, they were problematical, and I know a lot of people who were actually doing that work on their homes as well, which is good for the, as you say, the infrastructure. But it's that extra burden as well on getting supplies, and people who are on furlough with factories not working. Obviously, they weren't producing as well, and I think we found that with the park equipment that we're going to have with the new equipment for the parks, where it's now being manufactured, whereas it would have been bought off the shelf. So it all takes its cost. But the question I was going to ask, actually, it's obviously great news in the work that you've been doing. I'm keen that obviously local firms are engaged. Do you know how many local firms are engaged? You said there was £155 million spent last year on procurement, and we estimate 150 this year. Well, how many local firms are engaged with that? And secondly, how many local people? Because my worry is sometimes that some firms get large contracts. They come in, they're staying on the Oystermouth Road, which is great. We're very happy with that, but they're all gone then on the weekend, and they're not sort of spending the money in Swansea, and they're not from Swansea. So it would be interesting to find out the number of firms engaged and the number of people.
Okay, thank you, Lyndon. Martin, have you got a quick answer to that, or do you want to put it in a letter back to us?
I've got a quick part answer, if I may, Chair. So yeah, we'll be able to summarise the detail that you're after, but just to advise on on what we can do in terms of promoting that local employment. So even where the principal contractor is not local, we will hold the meet the buyer events. We will require them to make sure all the opportunities are advertised locally, advertised on Sell to Wales, and we will ensure that we build in things like the Beyond Bricks and Mortar targets, so they have to employ a percentage of local people. So we'll give you all of the detail, Lyndon, in terms of the numbers of contractors and the spend. But there are things that we can do even when the main contract goes effectively to somebody outside of the area to maximise the amount of local retention and local spend that still comes and stays within Swansea.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin.
Okay, Councillor Phil Downing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, on the major procurement side of it, I think we've come on leaps and bounds over the years, and we've learned a lot. Whether I can say other people will look at us for good practice, I don't know if we're actually there at the moment. But just a comment on the labour only first, because I had my own company years ago. We used to do a lot of work for West Glamorgan, and I think I would have got on much better if I was labour only at the time. But one thing you mentioned about the one-man band and the labour only, do we then scrutinise these one-man bands and the other, specifically on the safety side of it and the safety of the public side of it? Because a lot of these people go into homes. And the other thing is, what do we do then to scrutinise the main contractor when they sub things out to single contractors that we don't know about? I think that's a worry, because don't forget there are cowboys out there, and they're pretty good at what they do. Thanks.
Nigel, have you got a relatively quick answer to that, or do you want to give it to us in writing?
Yeah, I've got quite a quick one. For the major projects, obviously we have to notify the HSE through an F10. That advise them who the principal contractor is, and any other contractors will be working on that contract for them. We also ask major contractors if they are subbing any work out to let us know who they are, and we will do our own financial and health and safety checks on them. So, appreciate what Councillor Down is saying, and it is a massive concern and risk. Hence the reason why we ask those questions up front, so we can do our checks and make sure that there's no issues with the contractors that the big boys are using. So we've got that already in place.
Okay.
If I can come back quickly, Chair.
Yes, by all means.
What do we do if we find a subcontractor that you don't know about? So what do we do with the main contractor?
we have a monthly meeting with them, Councillor Downing, and at that meeting we will go through any issues on site, any accidents, etc., progress. We also do a quick check on the signing in documentation to see who's been on site, the number of people who are on site, etc., and which contractors they work for. If we find that they've got a contractor on there that we aren't aware of, then we would ask and do our own checks for due diligence. But we'd also ask them why they haven't notified us. And that would be taken as a risk against that contractor, that they're not giving us the full information in relation to the contractors that you're using.
Okay, Martin, you put your hand up straight away there. Do you want to pass comment on this?
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, just to add that obviously the Council has signed up to the Welsh Government Ethical Employment and Supply Chains Initiative, which also means that as part of the contract requirements, those sorts of key principles about employment practices are written into the contract, and in agreement with the trade unions, if the trade unions are aware of any inappropriate practice with any of the contractors working for us, then they have a direct route into us to advise us. We haven't yet had one reported to us in the sort of 2.5 years that we've been operating that. So there are other mechanisms, other safety nets that hopefully allow us to identify any of those concerns.
Okay, Councillor Jeff Jones is the next question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad it's been highlighted, you know, the importance of procurement, you know, in any organisation. And with regards to local suppliers, I think it's, you know, great we're trying to keep as much, you know, money and employment actually locally. But it worries me, we're actually talking about fragmenting or breaking up contracts. Are we leaving ourselves open to challenge with regards to preferential treatment? You know, we need to cover our backs, I think, there with regards to that. And with regards to local suppliers, one of the local suppliers we've got, and I think it's been said, you know, we try and work with suppliers to improve things anyway, is the local authority. Now, the local authority, I think, when you speak to people in schools, are extremely expensive. Is there any work being done there with regards to making them more of an acceptable supplier?
Nigel, Martin, do you want to answer that first, and then Nigel?
Yeah, if I may, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just two things. One, in terms of the breaking up of contracts, obviously consideration is given, and it is something that we are requested to do and required to do by Welsh Government as well, to try and reduce the barriers. The reason why breaking up contracts, and it's not a one thing for all opportunities. There needs to be consideration of the type of work. What tended to be the case previously is a perception that the greater the value of what you're procuring, the greater the economies of scale. So the more you buy, the cheaper it becomes. That isn't the case, because the materials, for example, are the same price whether you buy one of them or 100 of them normally. What breaking up does is allow it to be more attractive to local SMEs, because effectively their turnover threshold means that they are prevented from bidding for contracts that are significantly above their turnover because of the risk that might present to the authority. So it is careful consideration, and some of the work that was done through the recent pilot project with Welsh Government was directly looking at breaking up the contract, and this isn't, you know, breaking it into tiny little bits, but instead of, for example, putting out 500 properties for garden improvements, we might have 2 or 3 contracts for 100, 150 each, meaning that might mean that some of the contractors who were previously put off or were previously prevented from bidding would have the opportunity. The second bit around value for money.
Martin, sorry, Martin. There's somebody at my door a minute. Can I just speak to them? I'm sorry about this. It's one of the problems working from home.
I'll briefly cover the second point. We can put this in more detail in the written answer, Chair. In terms of the value for money, councillors, many of you were actually directly involved in the commissioning process that we run over 2 to 3 years as part of Sustainable Swansea. And in doing that, benchmarked all of the internal council services. And I know it's something that we often do get raised, but, you know, and it often comes from schools who procure works directly. What generally is the case is that there's not a comparison on a like-for-like basis. And I'm sure we can cover this in more detail in the written response. But for example, as part of any works we do with Welsh Government grant in terms of schools, we are required to demonstrate that the services that we provide are value for money. We also self-impose that on any works we do on the housing revenue account. So there's a regular review and a benchmarking of rates as to what the council carries out and charges and what the private sector carries out and charges. And I'm yet to see any example of any notable difference in 15 years of being told there are differences. I'm still yet to see it. And I'm more than happy if anybody's got examples to review those on a case-by-case basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Martin, for that answer, which you've given me about a dozen times in the past. Nigel, and then the leader then. Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the education one, I attended premise managers meeting with head teachers, and I think in the 3 or 4 years that I've been the head of service, this myth keeps getting raised that we are expensive compared to others. And I've asked at every single meeting almost for an example from a head teacher of where they've had a price to carry out work which is significantly lower than we provided. I've yet to receive one. And as Martin says, any time that they do raise things with us, we had one recently in relation to canopies, where the schools were told they had to come to us for health and safety reasons linked to COVID. And one school came back and said that they could get the job done for about £4,500–5,000 cheaper. When we looked into it, they hadn't got anything in relation to planning or anything in relation to drainage, and they were just going to put the canopy up and not consider anything else. So by the time you added those two things onto it, we were actually cheaper than the private contract they were proposing to use. So it is something that does get raised a lot, Councillor Jones. I appreciate that the myth is out there. We are trying to remove that and get the trust from the head teachers in relation to the service we provide. I mean, the work and the tenders are all from external contractors. We've got 22 on a framework, and they are asked to tender for the work for the schools. So we are going out to contractors, we're going out to the open market, if you like. So I keep getting surprised when this is raised that we are expensive, when every time that we've been asked, we've been able to prove that we're not. But I'd be more than happy to look at any examples that anybody does have. Thank you.
Leader?
I can say, Chris,
Sorry,
that's very interesting because, it's not my own experience. Other people, actors, governors have also brought it up. So that's a very interesting answer.
Leader?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I mean, I just to reiterate what the guys have said, really. I mean, I had that misconception myself, I think, a few years ago, that some of our services would be more expensive, and we've benchmarked it, and it's not the case. And as both Martin and Nigel have said, I think what often happens is that schools and others will go out for a quote. They will get a quote back, but the requirement is not the same as what we are responding to. So we respond to make sure all of the elements are included that are required, and often some of the contractors will only bid on what they've been asked, which isn't the full, perhaps the requirement that's required in order to deliver something. I think the other thing I would say on this is, as general power of competence becomes law, and the council itself is able to go out and do more, and step into the marketplace more often, that is something that will be, hugely important for us in terms of offering value for money in the marketplace. Because one of the things that I'm very keen to see the council do is to step into the market and to offer its services where we can to others, and to grow our workforce further. So that is something that I think GPC will allow us to do. And again, that'll be a real test in the marketplace, won't it? Because then we'll be out there bidding against others, and we will see then the full value what the council can bring.
Okay, thank you. Now, there's Councillor Wendy Fitzgerald and Lyndon still got their hands up. Were they legacy ones or? Yeah, right.
Legacy would be, sorry, I'm having problems getting everything down at the moment, or up, depending on what I want.
May not be the best word in, Mandy.
No, but you know what I mean.
Right, are there any other members now who wish to ask questions or pass comment? Right, okay. A couple of questions from me. Nigel, on the asbestos, now, we've had some really bad experiences over the last few years with asbestos. And I know we had a transfer station, Western Morgan had one up in up in Clydach, and we did do an awful lot of work in it. How much are we doing now, and are we confident that we want to stay in that business?
All we do now, Chair, is the inspect and test with our own team. We've stopped doing the removal itself. We use contractors to do that. There's been changes with the HSE in relation to what you actually report, what's reportable in relation to asbestos removal. And it's become so broad that we've decided not to do any of that work ourselves. So it is called contracted out. The management team that we've got in relation to asbestos, I think, is probably the most experienced in Wales, hence the reason why we take the lead on that, and we have done for the past 20 years or so, and many other authorities do buy into that contract for asbestos removal and testing and inspecting. So it's something that we've got immense experience in with the team over many years. But as I say, we've taken the decision not to do it with our own workforce and to utilise contractors.
But we didn't do it when we done Oceana, did we? You know, we had a separate contractor in because the demolition company brought their own people in.
Yes, yeah, that's good. And similarly with the school decided to do the window replacement themselves, probably thought that we were too expensive. And ended up with asbestos being removed, and thankfully it was two of our electricians who noticed the panels that they were removing contained asbestos, because every employee in corporate building services is trained every 3 years on asbestos awareness, so they're more than aware of where asbestos is in all of our buildings.
Okay, thank you. Martin, on the framework, which we have a number of through legal services, right through down to road repairs and everything in between. How often do we review the valuation on the framework? Because I can remember that at one stage the framework we had to have an audit of it every 2 years to make sure that whatever we were paying was relative at the time.
Yeah, I think, Chair, it probably varies per framework, and other colleagues may be able to add some detail, but you would normally let a framework, from my experience, for 3 to 5 years is typically the time we'd let a framework. That can often be a sort of 3-year plus an extra 2 years, or 3 years plus the option to extend. So, and effectively what the framework does is get the suppliers or contractors a seat at the table for that period of time. When each individual contract is then let, then the due diligence is done and the contract is entered into by the individual authority. So for example, the financial standing would be checked then on each of those projects prior to doing a contract award report. What it does do is it in theory sort of speeds up the first stage of that procurement process, and it also gives the contractors and suppliers some degree of certainty over continuity of the pipeline of work coming. So normally, as I said, there's no sort of formal inbuilt review other than when you have the breaks within that framework. As I said, some can be longer. You can have a framework up to 10 years, but that's very rare. Normally it's 3 to 5 years maximum, sometimes shorter, sometimes a little bit longer.
Because the reason I ask is the framework we had, and we appointed the people who originally done doors, who done the Kingsway, were, you know, that did fail, isn't it? The company failed, and they were on the framework. And I was wondering how we actually do the due diligence on the framework companies, because at the end of the day, we could be we do contract out onto the framework, and they have their own businesses external to the framework. So, it's a risk to us, that is. And, that was a financial risk that happened on the Kingsway with someone on the framework.
Absolutely, Chair. The reality is, when the contract award for that original contract took place, the financial analysis would have been done and was done to determine the financial standing of that contractor at the time. So whether you've gone on a framework or gone on an open procurement route, the financial information that was used to make the judgment, to make the contract award, because bearing in mind what the framework does, it gets you that seat at the table. Normally cabinet, depending on the values, could be delegated. Normally cabinet would be making the formal decision on each of those awards after contract award report would have been done. And in doing that, colleagues from legal and finance would undertake that due diligence. So, and they would have looked at the financial standing of all of the contractors and effectively their ratings and identified, whether they thought that they presented a risk. And at the time when the contract was awarded, they clearly passed the acceptable threshold. So even though, so what the framework doesn't do, it doesn't guarantee you that you can work for that council for 5 years. You still, on each and every occasion the tenders take place, have to satisfy the criteria, because it is linked directly to the contract value for each of the projects that are being delivered.
I understand that, Martin, but what I'm saying is there is a method by which we check on the credit ratings of each of these companies, and if they're on the framework, they normally get a better credit rating, because they know, the credit agencies know very well that they are on our framework and on other frameworks as well. It could be right across Wales or even across the UK. So that gives them that extra edge when it comes to their credit ratings. And all I'm concerned about is that is taken into consideration. But I think that's a question for probably for us to put in a letter to our finance colleagues to examine if by being on the framework, their credit rating is increased.
Yeah, fair question, Chair, and something we can ask finance colleagues to respond on via that letter.
Okay, Nigel, on the labour-only contracts, what are we paying people? Are we paying minimum rate? Do we pay the going commercial rate, or do we pay somewhere in between?
It varies very much on the contract. Obviously, we've got some specialist trades who are working for us. The gas engineers on the boiler replacement contract, they'd be paid in the region of £25 an hour, there or thereabouts. And then we've got environmental works where there's some labour-only elements there, and they would be maybe £17 per hour that they are charging. So the hourly rates do vary considerably, and it depends on the specialism of the people that we're looking to work for us.
Okay, and do we take into consideration the mean rate across the, like there used to be in an industry I was involved in, the chemical industry, there used to be a standard chemical rate that everybody had to have. Do we do the same thing with, say, plasterers or brickies or whatever?
Yeah, and when they make the returns, if somebody comes in with a very low hourly rate, we would question that, because obviously they've got overheads and profit element that they would build into their rate. So if they were saying, £10 an hour for a plasterer, we would be very concerned that they aren't paying the going rate. So
yeah,
and as you know, a lot of people will try to win work by putting in a low rate, but we do challenge that, and colleagues from procurement have helped us have people removed from tenders because of our concerns in relation to that. So it's something we look at. And when we go to tender, we normally get 7 or 8 responses. So you can get an average of, as I say, for gas engineers, of about £25–30 an hour. If somebody returns a bid and it's £14 or £15, the alarm bells start to ring straight away, and you think, no, there's something wrong there. So we do obviously look at that, and we would scrutinise it if there were any concerns.
Okay, I think finally one of the questions I'll ask is with regards to the wood store in Cave Street and our stockpiling and what have you. One of the things I know we've asked in the past is consignment stocks. Do we have consignment stocks with major suppliers, with insulation, and for the information for members, consignment stocks means that we take into a warehouse what we're going to use, but we only pay for it when it comes out to that warehouse. So do we do any of that now, Nigel? Because I know at one stage when Martin was sitting in Cave Street, I know this discussion was about when we were buying in timber, like they're going out of fashion. So I'm wondering if we're doing the same now.
Yeah, we've done it recently in boilers. We were alerted of a significant price increase by the supplier. In order to negate the increased costs, we put in an order for 290 boilers, which is they will honour that price then as we install them throughout this financial year. So we do it on occasions, but it's difficult because should there be an issue with that company, you've got to make sure that anything they've got stored for us is labelled as our belonging to Swansea Council. Otherwise, any litigators will go in there and say, well, we're having that and we're claiming that as part of the business value. So we've got to be very careful about what we actually ask others to keep on our behalf. So hence the reason why we try and stock as much as we can in our buildings.
No, that's fair comment. I don't think there's anything else. I was only going to ask about the cost effectiveness and how transparent our procurement is, because you know, I've been told stories in the past, and I don't necessarily think they're good. They are an example, but when we do a transparency, who actually checks up on it? Is it the auditors, or is it anyone working in the various departments, we'll say in building services or in parks or whatever? Do we have anybody that checks to see how that is being done? I know we have this pyramid system, but how is it, what's the checks and balances on that?
I think the obvious one is when somebody puts an order in, it's not the same person who will put that order through. So the project surveyor will put an order for an enveloping contract with a particular supplier. That will come to me to authorise. When I authorise it, then it goes to one of our buyers. They will then look at that, and it's random. It's not, you don't pick who it goes to. It's random. It's picked up by one of 6 buyers. They will then review that, and if they've got any concerns, raise it with colleagues in procurement or category manager. If they are satisfied that we've gone out and followed the correct CPR rules with 4 tenders, 6 tenders, etc., then they would then process the order, which then comes to me again for approval. So there's a double check there, if you like, and then that order would then go through. That's then also picked up as part of the internal audit that we have with Byron and others from internal audit, and Welsh Government also audit us at year end, and they will review anything that we've got in relation to contracts, how they've been awarded, how many responses we had. There's lots of questions that they ask us that we've got to make sure that we can show value for money, due diligence, and we follow the correct process. So it's not just internal with myself and senior managers, but also Welsh Government and internal audit look at it. And there's no way somebody could be in cahoots with the contractor to put an order through that they would get, because it's just impossible.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Thank you very much. The only other item now is this 13 about improvements on the council's procurement practices. I think that's something members will have to look at before we can make any comments on it, because it doesn't seem there's a great deal of movement other than with e-cards and what have you that can be done. And can I thank you, Nigel, you, Martin, and the leader, and Councillor Robert Francis Davis for being on this call today, because as you can imagine, members are really concerned about our procurement, because the amount of money we spend in and how much we can keep as much as possible local. And thank you very much for your information today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You're welcome.
Right, we'll go back to the agenda now when I can find it. Okay. Right, Michelle, I've lost the agenda for some unknown reason.
That's okay. We're just on project plan, your next meetings, etc. The next meeting is social services, which will include social services and the commissioning aspects. That's going to be on the 13th of September. And then on the 27th, you've got education and the corporate centre as well, to do a similar, answering the same questions we've asked of place. And then it's going to be a case of going out and starting to do some of your work around talking to others and looking at some of the social and local procurement good practice, etc. You'll notice that I've put a few dates in that are providing us sort of a little bit of a framework for us to work to. So obviously, if we need to change those, we can, but it gives us some sort of basis. And that would be looking to get a report to Cabinet before the end of the council term. So we're hoping to get to report in March or April. So By the time we've written it and it's gone through the scrutiny programme committee, etc., it'll be about March or April. So that's just the update that we've done over the last month.
Jeff, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just going to say, you know, the question I asked with regards to the cost effectiveness of the local authority, you know, it does worry me, because I know a lot of other governors have actually raised it as well. I think, you know, we need to get to the bottom of this. I'll certainly pick it up with, you know, the schools I'm involved in. I would ask if other members can, you know, take it up with you know, their schools. It's disappointing to me, because they actually do say that, you know, on a like-for-like basis, you know, with regards to should be the same specification anyway, that they're more expensive, especially if the leader actually said that, you know, the local authority is actually going out to the market. I think it's an important aspect for the local authority at the end of the day.
I think you're right, and I think it's something that we have got to do. I've been involved in about 4 different cases of this in the commission and reviews and in other inquiries, and I think there is a perception, but the perception is not. The problem is people don't compare like with like, and that is the big issue. And I think, and that is something which, again, will be highlighted. But I will ask Michelle to write, and we will get some information for you on that, because I think one of the things that we did notice that when we done the commissioning review on our technical services, that's the quantity surveyors, architects, and what have you, we were extremely competitive with the private sector. As a matter of fact, in many cases, we're slightly below the private sector. When we done one with building services, didn't do one as building services as such. We did one about gas supply and gas fitters and emergency services, and we were slightly above it, but we had a 24-hour service, and it was a different type of service. So you've got to, as I say, compare like with like, and then you can do it. On social services, again, I think there's an issue between how much it costs to run a council residential home and a private residential home. But then again, you then have to look at the standards of care. You then have to look at the staffing arrangements. So there is different things in different heights. But taking what you said about putting windows in or doing repairs to a school doors or something like that, I think it's only fair that we ask Michelle to write, and we'll get some answers for you on that, and answers for all the rest of the committee.
Yeah, you know, schools do spend a lot of money, you know what I mean, on not necessarily doors, but refurbishing, you know, parts of the school and so on. Some of them quite large contracts, which, you know, we could be missing out on anyway as a local authority. And it comes down, like you say, like for like, you know, the specification is really important, and it's an aspect. I wish I'd brought it up with regards to this meeting, with regards to, you know, variations to a contract after when we actually go out, that's dealt with. Perhaps I can bring that up later further in another meeting. But, you know, with regards to this, I think we need to bottom out on it, you know, find out what exactly is going on.
You've also got education coming actually at the end of, so you can see from the other aspect as well, can't you, from both sides of that, if that's
well, it might be a good idea, you know, perhaps to invite, you know, one of these, you know, I assume a lot of schools have actually, you know, the larger schools have got business managers anyway, and they're the ones that actually deal with it.
Well, we'll have that discussion later on, I think, because that might be a good idea. Okay, is there any other questions or comments? No? If not, then can I thank you all for being here on the meeting today? And Michelle, can you hang on for a few minutes and we'll have that discussion? And I look forward to seeing you all in the near future, and maybe